On the worst night of a Denver winter, when the airport had shut down and the highways had vanished under the snow and every sane person was home behind a locked door, a 56-year-old woman named Gloria Tatum was still out driving in the blizzard. Because driving was the only thing that ever quieted the grief she carried. And she picked up one last stranded stranger and drove him an hour through the whiteout to his home up in the foothills. And when they finally got there, safe, and the man reached for his wallet, Gloria waved it away. "Put that up," she told him. "You think I'm charging you on a night like this? Just get inside and get warm." She did not know his name. She had not asked, because her mother had raised her on one simple rule, that you stop for whoever's stranded, and you do not ask their name first. And so she had not asked. And she drove off into the snow, having done one more quiet kindness for one more stranger. And she had no idea, none at all, that the grateful old man waving to her from his lit doorway was Sterling Drake, the founder and the owner of Meridian Airways. The same airline that 3 years before had let her only daughter die at 30,000 feet, and then spent 3 years fighting Gloria Tatum in court so that it would never once have to say that it was sorry. She had just driven that man home through a blizzard. For free? Stay with me all the way to the end, because what happened when Sterling Drake found out who his kind driver really was is going to stay with you a very long time. And before we begin, do me one kindness and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. It always means more than you know. The storm had been in the forecast for days, one of those great heavy systems that rolls down off the Rockies and buries the whole Front Range. And by nightfall, it had done exactly what they said it would. Shut the airport, closed the interstates, turned a city of millions into a silent white nothing, where the only things moving were the plows and the desperate and the few drivers too stubborn or too sad to stay home. Gloria Tatum was the third kind. She had been driving for the rideshare company for a little over 2 years, nights mostly, and she would tell you, if you asked, that she did it for the money, which was true as far as it went, because a widow on a fixed income can always use the money. But that was not really why Gloria drove. Gloria drove because of the house. The house was the problem. The house she and Leonard had bought 30 years ago, where they had raised Camille, where every room held a version of her daughter at a different age. The pencil marks on the kitchen doorframe charting Camille's height year by year up to the last one. The bedroom Gloria still could not bring herself to change. After Leonard passed, the house had gotten quiet. But Camille had still been in the world then, a phone call away, coming by on Sundays, filling it back up. And after Camille, the house had gone from quiet to something with no word for it, a silence with a weight, a silence that pressed on Gloria's chest in the long evenings until she could not breathe in it. And she had discovered, almost by accident, that the one place the silence could not follow her was behind the wheel of her car, out in the moving world, with a stranger in the back seat who needed to get somewhere and a road to take them down. So she drove. She drove to outrun a silence. And on the night of the blizzard, when every notification told her to go home, the thought of that house in the storm was worse than the storm. So Gloria Tatum kept driving. People who have not lost the center of their life do not understand about the silence. So let me try to tell you. It is not the absence of noise. Gloria could fill the house with noise, the television, the radio, the kettle, and the silence would sit underneath all of it, patient, waiting for her to stop pretending. The silence was the absence of a particular set of sounds that had been the soundtrack of her whole adult life and were never coming back. Leonard's key in the door at 5:40, Camille thundering down the stairs 2 at a time, the phone ringing on a Sunday with her daughter's name on the screen. 30 years those sounds had filled that house, and now they were gone, all of them, And what was left was a quiet so total it had a texture, and a widow alone in it in the long evenings, with nothing between her and the full weight of everything she had lost. She had tried the things you try. She had tried church, and the casseroles, and the well-meaning friends who stopped coming around after the first year because grief that does not resolve makes people uncomfortable. She had tried sitting with it, breathing through it, all the things the book said. And then one night, restless past bearing, she had gotten in the car just to be somewhere else, and on a whim turned on the driving app, and picked up a chatty young woman going to the airport who talked the whole way about her boyfriend. And for those 20 minutes, Gloria Tatum had not heard the silence at all. That was the discovery. Out here, moving, with a stranger who needed something simple that Gloria could give. The silence could not reach her. It was not a solution. There is no solution. But it was a way through the nights. And on the night of the blizzard, the nights were all Gloria was trying to survive. She had taken her last few riders to safety, people stranded by the canceled flights and the dead buses. And she had told herself each one was the last, and then her phone had buzzed one more time, a ride request from the chaos around the shuttered airport. A man trying to get all the way up into the foothills, a fare every other driver in the city had clearly already declined because only a fool would attempt those roads tonight. Gloria looked at it a long moment. And then she thought about her mother, and the rule, and she accepted it. And she pointed the car toward the airport to go get whoever it was that nobody else would carry home. If a story about the one person still willing to go out into the storm for a stranger is the reason you're here tonight, then make sure you're subscribed. Because who that stranger turned out to be is the entire reason this story exists. She found him standing under the overhang outside the deserted terminal. An older man in a good overcoat with a single bag, no entourage, no car, just a tired-looking gentleman in his 60s who had plainly been standing in the cold a long time. And Gloria pulled up and rolled down the window and said, "You the one trying to get up to the foothills?" And the man bent down, relief breaking over his face, and said, "Yes, yes. Thank God, every other driver canceled. I was starting to think I'd be sleeping in the terminal." And Gloria said, "Well, not tonight. Get in. Mind the seat's a little cold." And the man climbed into the front seat beside her, because he seemed like the kind of man who would feel strange riding in the back. And they pulled out into the blizzard together, a tired old stranger and a grieving woman. Neither one with the slightest idea who the other was. It was a terrible drive, and a good one. Terrible because the roads were genuinely dangerous. The kind of whiteout where the lane lines vanish and you steer by faith in the feel of the rumble strips. Where a stretch that takes 20 minutes in summer takes an hour and a half, and every minute of it demands your whole attention. And good, because there is a particular intimacy that happens between two people in a car in a storm, sealed together in a small, warm box of dashboard light, while the world tries to kill them gently with snow. And they talk the way people only talk in those conditions. Easily, truthfully, the way strangers on a train sometimes tell each other things they have never told anyone. The man was easy to talk to. He asked Gloria about herself, really asked and listened. And she found herself telling him about Leonard, and about the house, and about driving to outrun the quiet. Though she did not, that night, tell him about Camille. Because Camille was the one thing Gloria did not give to strangers, the one room she kept locked. And the man told her, in turn, that he had built a business, that he traveled too much, that he had been stuck for 9 hours and missed something important and was just bone-tired and wanted to get home. And he said it the way successful men say such things when they are too weary to perform, with a flatness that Gloria, who had carried real grief, recognized as its own kind of sadness. She liked him. That is the part that mattered later to both of them. On that drive, not knowing one single thing about who he was, Gloria Tatum liked the man and was kind to him. The simple, unearned kindness of one tired human being to another in a storm. What they talked about on that long crawl through the dark was the small, ordinary scaffolding of two lives. He asked her how long she had been driving, and she told him 2 years. And he asked what she did before, and she told him she had kept the books for a church for 20 years until a new pastor brought in his own people. And the man nodded like he understood being shown the door by an institution you had given your best years to. And she got the sense, without being told, that he had done some showing of doors himself in his time, and regretted it. He asked about Leonard. She told him about Leonard, the good, steady man she had married at 23, gone now a decade from the kind of slow cancer that gives you time to say everything and somehow never enough time. And the man went quiet at that. A real quiet, not the polite kind, and said he was sorry, and Gloria believed him. At one point the car fishtailed on a patch of glare ice, and for a long second they both stopped breathing while she steered into it the way Leonard had taught her 30 years ago. Gently, gently, and brought it back straight. And the man let out a shaky laugh and said, "I would have panicked and killed us both." And Gloria said, "That's why you're in the passenger seat." And the man laughed again, for real. And something eased between them, the particular trust that grows between two people who have been a little frightened together and come through it. He did not tell her his name, and she did not ask his, and neither of them thought a thing of it, because that was simply how Gloria operated. And the man seemed glad, that night, to be no one in particular, just a tired passenger in good hands. When they finally crested the last hill, and the man's house came into view, a big, handsome place glowing warm against the snow, Gloria eased the car up the long drive and put it in park and let out a breath. And the man laughed, a real laugh. The laugh of someone who had genuinely not been sure he would make it home. And he said, "You are a remarkable driver and a remarkable woman." And he took out his wallet and started pulling out bills, a lot of bills, the careless generosity of the rich. And he tried to press them into her hand. And Gloria Tatum closed his hand back around his money and pushed it gently away, and said the words that would haunt that man for the rest of his life. "Put that up. You think I'm taking your money on a night like this? I didn't drive you up here for that. I drove you because you were stranded and you needed to get home, and my mama raised me that you stop for whoever's stranded and you don't ask their name first. Now go on inside and get yourself warm." The man sat there a moment, holding his rejected money, looking at her with an expression she could not read. And then he said, very quietly, "Thank you," and got out into the snow, and walked to his lit doorway, and turned and lifted a hand to her, and Gloria lifted a hand back and drove away into the storm. And that, she thought, was that. One more stranger, safely home. She thought about him for a minute or two as she crept back down the mountain, the way you think about a pleasant stranger, with a small warmth and no expectation of ever seeing them again. A nice man, she decided. Lonely, maybe, under the money she had clocked from the overcoat and the watch and the size of that house. The particular loneliness she had learned to spot because she carried its cousin. She hoped he had someone inside that big lit house, and suspected from something in how he had lingered at the door that he did not. And then she turned her attention back to the road, because the road in a blizzard does not allow you the luxury of thinking about anything else for long. And by the time she had made it down to the flats and pointed the car at last toward home, She had mostly let him go, filed under the thousand-kind strangers of a driving life. A face she would not have been able to pick out of a crowd a week later. That was the mercy and the ordinariness of it. She had done a small good thing for a tired man in a storm, the way her mother had taught her, the way Camille would have, and she had asked nothing and expected nothing and learned nothing about him, not even his name. And she drove home through the dying storm with no idea at all that she had just spent an hour being kind to the one man on this earth she had the most reason to hate. She did not know his name. She would not learn it for another 9 days. And when she learned it, the whole world she had so carefully rebuilt around her grief was going to come apart in her hands. To understand what was coming, you have to know about Camille. And I am going to tell you, gently, because she deserves to be more than the thing the airline did to her. Camille Tatum was Gloria and Leonard's only child, born when they had nearly given up hoping. And she had been, by every account of everyone who ever knew her, one of those rare people who is simply good all the way through. She had grown up in that house with the pencil marks on the doorframe. And she had become a pediatric nurse because she had wanted, since she was a little girl, to take care of children who were sick and frightened. And she had been, her colleagues said, extraordinary at it. The one who stayed late, the one who sang to the scared ones, the one who lived her grandmother's rule out loud every single day. You stop for whoever's stranded. Camille never asked anybody's name first either. She just helped. She was 24 years old and engaged to a good young man, and 3 weeks from her wedding, and she had been flying home from a nursing conference, a short routine flight on Meridian Airways, when she died. I want to give you a little more of her than that, because a young woman should be more than the manner of her leaving. Camille Tatum laughed with her whole body. She was the kind of child who brought home strays, the bird with the broken wing, the kid at school nobody would sit with. And she never grew out of it. She just got a license and a stethoscope and made a profession of it. On the pediatric ward, they gave her the hard cases, the frightened ones, the ones whose own fear made them fight the people trying to help them. Because Camille had a way of getting down to their level and talking to them like people and singing, off-key and shameless, until the fight went out of them and the trust came in. She was engaged to a young man named Andre who looked at her like she hung the moon, and she had called her mother from the conference 2 nights before she died, late, giddy, to argue about the seating chart and whether her cousins could be trusted at the same table. And Gloria had been half asleep and a little short with her. And that, the ordinary half-asleep shortness of a mother who assumed there would be 1,000 more calls, was the last real conversation they ever had. Gloria would give the rest of her life for 90 more seconds of that phone call. That is the thing about losing them suddenly. You do not get to know that the last ordinary moment is the last one. You just look back later and find it sitting there, unremarkable, irretrievable, the final entry before the line goes blank. What happened on that airplane is the thing Gloria had spent 3 years trying to make the world look at. Somewhere over the mountains, Camille had a sudden severe medical emergency, the kind that is survivable, entirely survivable, if the person is gotten to a hospital quickly. Another passenger, by terrible chance also a nurse, knew exactly what was happening and told the crew exactly what was needed, which was to divert, immediately, to the nearest airport and get this young woman to an emergency room, that there was time, but not much. And the flight did not divert. It did not divert because the crew was poorly trained for the situation, and because the emergency equipment that should have been aboard was not properly maintained, and because, underneath all of it, Meridian Airways had spent years building a culture in which diverting a flight was an enormously costly black mark, a thing that wrecked the on-time numbers the company lived and died by. a thing for which crews had learned, without anyone ever quite saying it out loud, that they would pay. So the plane flew on to its scheduled destination, with a dying young woman in seat 14C and a nurse beside her begging them to land. And by the time they were on the ground and the paramedics finally reached her, Camille Tatum was gone. She had died, slowly, 30 minutes from a hospital that could have saved her, because landing the airplane would have cost the company money. Gloria had read the transcript so many times she could recite it. She knew the timestamps. She knew that the nurse in the next seat, a woman named Pat, who would later weep through her entire deposition, had identified the emergency correctly within 90 seconds and told the flight attendant precisely what was happening and precisely what was needed. She knew the flight attendant had relayed it to the cockpit. She knew there had been a pause, a fatal administrative pause, while somewhere in the chain a calculation was made that was never written down, but that everyone in the industry understood, the calculation about what a diversion costs, the fuel, the fees, the cascade of missed connections, the black mark on a captain's record. And she knew that in that pause, her daughter's window had closed. She knew the plane had flown on. She knew that Pat had held Camille's hand the whole way down and told her she was doing great. She was doing so great. Just hang on. The way you lie to someone you cannot save, because the lie is the last kindness left. And she knew that the paramedics had met the plane at the gate, on time, the flight's precious on-time record intact, and had worked on Camille on the jet bridge for a long time before one of them looked up at Pat and gave the small shake of the head that ends a world. That was what the company's lawyers called, in their filings, an unforeseeable medical event for which the carrier bore no liability. Gloria called it what it was. They could have landed. They chose the schedule. And her daughter died on a jet bridge 30 minutes from a hospital that could have saved her. And then Meridian Airways had done the thing that turned a tragedy into a crime against Gloria's soul. It had lawyered up. It had denied, delayed, and buried. Its attorneys had argued that Camille's condition was unforeseeable, that the crew followed protocol, that the company bore no liability, and they had wielded the fine print on the back of a ticket, the forced arbitration clause that nobody reads, to drag the whole thing out of open court and into a private process designed to exhaust and outlast a grieving family. They had offered, at one point, a settlement, a small one by their standards, contingent on Gloria signing away her right to ever speak about it, a non-disclosure, blood money with a gag attached. And Gloria had refused it, because she did not want their money. She wanted them to say it, to admit what they had done, to change it so it could not happen to another mother's child. And Meridian Airways, as a matter of cold policy, would not say it. For 3 years they had ground her down, the way a great machine grinds down a single human being. And Gloria Tatum had been losing slowly, the way ordinary people almost always lose against corporations. And she had nearly nothing left. And the name of the company that had taken her daughter and then fought her to a standstill was Meridian Airways, and the man who owned it, the man whose name was on the side of every one of those airplanes, was Sterling Drake, the man she had just driven home through a blizzard, for free. You should understand what those 3 years had actually been, because the cruelty of it was not loud. It was procedural, which is the worst kind. It had been letters. It had been a small army of polished attorneys who were never rude, never raised their voices, and never, ever gave an inch. It had been the discovery that the ordinary ticket Camille bought, with the ordinary fine print, contained a clause that signed away her family's right to a jury and forced the whole matter into private arbitration. A closed room with an arbitrator the airline had a hand in selecting, where there would be no public record and no headline and no 12 ordinary citizens looking at photographs of a pediatric nurse. It had been delay after delay, each one perfectly legal, each one calculated, Gloria came to believe, to wear her down, to run out her money and her hope and her years, because the machine had all the time and all the money in the world, and Gloria Tatum had a fixed income and a finite life. It had been the settlement offer when it finally came, an amount that was an insult dressed as generosity, with the condition attached, the non-disclosure, the requirement that in exchange for the money, Gloria agree never to speak Camille's story aloud again, that she helped them bury her daughter a second time. She had thrown the offer across the room, and she had kept fighting, alone, with a lawyer working mostly on faith, losing slowly for 3 years, against a company whose name she saw on the side of airplanes and on television and on the jersey of a stadium downtown. The name Meridian, everywhere, inescapable, the name of the thing that had killed her child, and would not say so. Sterling Drake's name was not on the lawsuit. Sterling Drake's name was on the building. If your chest is tight right now, that's the story doing its work. And this is exactly the moment to subscribe. Because what happened when these two truths finally collided is the reason I had to tell you this. There is a thing this story is really about, underneath the storm and the coincidence, and it is the way our world insulates powerful people from the human cost of what they do. Sterling Drake had not been on that airplane. Sterling Drake had, in all likelihood, never heard the name Camille Tatum, because that is precisely how a large corporation is built. With layers, with departments, with a legal division whose entire function is to make sure that the human catastrophes the company causes never reach the desk or the conscience of the man at the top, where they might become real. To Sterling Drake, if it had crossed his awareness at all, the death of Camille Tatum had been a line in a quarterly report, a contingent liability, a matter being handled by legal, an abstraction 3 layers down. He did not know about the pencil marks on the doorframe. He did not know she had been a pediatric nurse who sang to frightened children, or that she had been 3 weeks from her wedding, or that there had been a nurse in the next seat begging them to land. The machine had kept all of that from him, efficiently by design, so that he could go on being the visionary founder and never have to feel the weight of the one family his company had destroyed. That is not an accident. That is the product working as intended. And it is how a genuinely good airplane full of decent people can do a monstrous thing. And how the man whose name is on the door can sleep at night, because the system is built, from the ground up, to make sure he never has to know. It is worth knowing who Sterling Drake had been before he became the man whose company let Camille die. Because the tragedy of him is that he had not started there. He had grown up poor in Kansas City, and as a young man, full of ambition and good clothes he could barely afford, he had been treated by the airlines of that era the way the airlines of that era treated a young black man with a dream, which is to say with a contempt he never forgot. Bumped from flights, talked down to, made to feel like an intruder in a world that wished he would stay on the ground. And Sterling Drake had channeled all of it, the humiliation and the fury, into a vow. And the vow had become Meridian Airways, an airline he built from a single leased turboprop into a major carrier on one stubborn founding promise that he used to say in every speech in the early years, that Meridian would be the airline that treated ordinary people like somebody, that the schoolteacher in the back would be treated exactly as well as the executive up front, because Sterling Drake had been the man in the back and he remembered. For a long time he had meant it, and the airline had been good, had been known for it. And then it had grown, the way things grow, and the consultants had come, and the metrics, and the quarterly pressure, and the slow substitution of efficiency for the original promise. And somewhere in 20 years of scaling, the airline that existed to treat ordinary people like somebody had quietly become an airline that treated them like cargo with opinions. And Sterling Drake, riding up front in his own life now, insulated by his success from the cabin he had once sworn to protect, had not noticed the day his company stopped being the thing he built it to be. That was his real failure, the one underneath the legal one. Not that he was cruel, that he stopped paying attention. And a young woman died of his inattention in the back of an airplane with his name on the side of it, while he flew over the whole thing at 30,000 feet. And what happened to Gloria afterward, the 3 years of grinding, is not only a Meridian story, it is an American one. And it happens to ordinary people every single day in this country, far from any blizzard or any coincidence to save them. The fine print that stole Camille's case from a courtroom is in nearly every ticket and contract and app agreement you have ever clicked through without reading. The forced arbitration clause, the quiet surrender of your right to face a wrongdoer before a jury of your peers, slipped in among the terms because the people who write the terms know exactly what they are doing and know that you will never read it. It is one of the great invisible transfers of power of our age, the steady removal of the ordinary person's ability to hold a corporation accountable out in the open. And most of the families it crushes do not have a foundation at the end of it, do not get an apology on a doorstep, do not get a rule named after the one they lost. They just lose, quietly, in a closed room, and sign the paper, and disappear. And the machine rolls on, having learned nothing, until it does the same thing to the next family. Gloria Tatum got her miracle because a storm happened to put the owner of the company in her front seat. The harder truth underneath this gentle story is how many Glorias never get the storm. But here is what the machine had not counted on. It had not counted on a blizzard. It had not counted on its founder being stranded and humbled and stripped of his entourage and put, for one long hour, into the front seat of an ordinary car, where an ordinary woman who owed him nothing and had every reason in the world to hate him, had she known who he was, treated him instead with a pure and unearned kindness and refused his money and sent him home to get warm. Sterling Drake could not stop thinking about her. He could not say exactly why. It was not just the kindness, though the kindness had reached something in him that a man at his altitude rarely gets reached in. It was something about her, a depth, a grief he had recognized without being able to name. The way she had said, "You stop for whoever's stranded," like it was scripture. He had gone into his big, warm, empty house that night, a house not so different from Gloria's in the one way that mattered, which was the silence in it, and he had been unable to sleep. And in the morning, he had done the thing that powerful men do when they want to express gratitude, which was to summon his people and tell them to find the woman who had driven him home and do something significant for her. Find out who she was and take care of her. Because he owed her, and Sterling Drake paid his debts. And so the machine, for once, was sent looking not to bury a name, but to find one. And it found one. It found Gloria Tatum. And when the file came back to Sterling Drake's desk, the name on it stopped his heart. Because it was a name his legal division already knew very well. He had lain awake that whole first night thinking about her, the woman from the storm, turning it over the way you worry a loose tooth. It was not the kind of thing that usually kept Sterling Drake awake. He met admirable people all the time, was flattered and thanked and courted by the hour, and none of it touched him anymore. But the driver had not been trying to touch him. The driver had not known him from any other stranded old man, had wanted nothing, had refused the one thing he offered. And there is a particular power in being treated well by someone who has no idea you are worth treating well, because it is the only kind of regard that cannot be faked or bought. And Sterling Drake, who could buy almost anything, had not felt it in longer than he could remember. He thought about how she had said, "You stop for whoever's stranded," like it was simply settled. A law of nature she had stopped questioning long ago. He thought about the grief he had seen in her and not been able to name. And in the morning, restless and obscurely moved, he had called in his assistant and said, "There was a driver last night. In the storm, she brought me up the mountain when no one else would, and she would not let me pay her. I want you to find her and do something real for her. Find out who she is." He had meant it purely as a kindness. He had set the whole machine in motion to do one decent thing. And the machine, sent looking for the first time to find a name instead of bury one, had brought him the name Tatum. And everything he had spent 3 years not knowing came home to him at last. This is the part of the story I most want you to stay for. So if you're not subscribed, do it now. Because what Sterling Drake did when he finally understood is everything I'm trying to say tonight. He did not understand all at once. His assistant, doing the job he had asked, came back not just with the woman's name and address, but, because a thorough search turns these things up, with the flag that the name Tatum matched an active matter in legal. And Sterling, puzzled, had pulled the file himself, the actual file. For the first time, the file his lawyers had been managing for 3 years without his ever once reading it. And he sat alone in his office, the founder of Meridian Airways, and he read what his company had done to a 24-year-old pediatric nurse named Camille Tatum and to her mother. And he read it not as a liability, but for the first time as a story. Because now he had a face to put at the center of it. The calm, kind face of the woman who had driven him home through a blizzard and would not take his money. He read about the refused diversion. He read the deposition of the nurse who had begged them to land. He read his own company's legal filings, the cold denials, the arbitration maneuver, the gagged settlement offer, 3 years of his attorneys grinding a grieving mother into the ground with his money. In his name, on his behalf, while he flew over all of it at 30,000 feet and never knew. And Sterling Drake, who had built Meridian Airways 40 years ago as a young man who had been treated like nobody by the big carriers and had sworn he would build an airline that treated ordinary people like somebody, put his head down on the file that bore his own company's cruelty and wept. Because he understood that the woman who had lived his own forgotten promise back to him in a snowstorm, the woman who stopped for a stranger and didn't ask his name, was the very mother his company had decided was not worth the cost of a landing. He sat with it for a long time that night, alone in the office, long after the building had emptied. He was a man who had spent 40 years being decisive, and he found that he could not move. He read the file twice. He looked at the photograph of Camille that someone had clipped to the intake summary, a young woman in scrubs, laughing. And he thought about the small photo he had half noticed clipped to the visor of Gloria's car. And he understood with a lurch that it had been the same face, that the mother had been driving the whole storm with her dead daughter watching over her shoulder, that Gloria Tatum carried Camille with her into every car, every night, and had carried her, unknowing, into his. He kept circling back to the kindness, because it was the thing he could not get past. The fact that this woman, who had more reason than any person alive to wish him harm, had pulled over for him in a blizzard and refused his money, and sent him home to get warm, and had done it not knowing who he was. Which meant it was real. Which meant it was simply who she was. All the way down, the same all the way down goodness, he realized. That the file said her daughter had been famous for on the pediatric ward. The mother and the daughter, the same rule lived out. You stop for whoever's stranded, and his company had killed one of them, and his lawyers had spent 3 years grinding the other into dust, and the other had stopped for him in the snow anyway. Sterling Drake had been a hard man for a long time. He was not hard enough for that. What he did next, he did against the unanimous and increasingly alarmed advice of his entire legal division, and it began with him telling them to stop. Stop everything. Stop the arbitration, stop the motions, stop the grinding. Today, this hour. His general counsel told him he was insane, that he was admitting liability, that it would cost the company a fortune and invite 100 more suits, and Sterling Drake looked at the lawyer who had been protecting him so well for so long, from ever having to know what he was protecting him from, and said, "It already cost a young woman her life. I think we can afford to find out what it costs to finally do the right thing." And then Sterling Drake did the thing the powerful almost never do. He went, himself, in person, with no lawyers, to Gloria Tatum's small quiet house, and he knocked on her door. And when she opened it and saw him, and her face went slack with confusion, the stranger from the storm standing on her step, he did not hide behind a single thing. He said, "Mrs. Tatum, you drove me home 9 nights ago, through the blizzard, and you wouldn't take my money. My name is Sterling Drake. I own Meridian Airways. And I have come to tell you what my company did to your daughter Camille, and that it was wrong, all of it, and that I am sorry, and that sorry is not enough, and that I am going to spend whatever is left of my life trying to make it less wrong. I should have come 3 years ago. I didn't know. That is my failure and no excuse. But I know now, and I am not going to look away again." Gloria Tatum stood in her doorway and looked at the man she had been kind to, the man who owned the airline that killed her child, and the world roared in her ears. And I will not pretend to you that what she felt in that moment was forgiveness, because it was not. It was something far more complicated and far more human. A great black wave of grief and rage and the unbearable vertigo of the coincidence. That of all the stranded strangers in all the storm, she had stopped for him, had been kind to him, had sent him home to get warm. And she did not invite him in, not that day. She told him to leave, and he left. And she sat down on her own floor and shook. But he had said the words. After 3 years of a machine that would not say the words, the man himself had stood on her step and said them. And that, it turned out, was the beginning of something. Because grief that is finally acknowledged is a different animal than grief that is denied. In the days after, she did not know what to do with any of it. She told her sister, who said sue him for everything, and she told her lawyer, who got very excited about the founder personally admitting fault on a doorstep with no counsel present. And Gloria listened to all of it and felt none of it, because the truth was that the thing roaring in her was not strategy. It was grief turned inside out. The unbearable collision of the kind, tired man she had liked in the storm and the faceless company that had killed her child, now revealed to be the same person, so that she could not hate him cleanly the way she had hated the company, and could not forgive him at all, and had to live in the wretched space between. She kept coming back to one thing he had said on the step, the thing that, against all her will, she believed. I didn't know. She had spent 3 years imagining the man at the top gloating over her destruction. And the reality, somehow worse and somehow better, was that he had simply never looked. That her daughter's death had been so small to his enormous machine that it had never once reached him. And that the moment it did, he had come himself, in the snow, with no lawyers, and said the words. It did not make it right. Nothing was going to make it right. But it was the first time in 3 years that anyone on that side had treated Camille as a person instead of a liability. And Gloria Tatum, who had been starving for exactly that and only that, found she could not quite slam the door on it. So she did not call her lawyer back right away. She sat with it. And after a while, she called Sterling Drake instead and said, "You come back here and you bring no lawyers and you tell me everything from the beginning." And he did. And it was the hardest afternoon of both their lives. He sat at her kitchen table under the door frame with the penciled height marks he could not stop looking at. And he told her everything. Not the lawyer's version, the real one. What the transcript said, what the crew had done and failed to do, what the culture in his company had quietly rewarded, how the calculation had been made, how his own attorneys had handled her, all of it, holding nothing back and offering no defense, because he had decided that the only thing left that he could give her worth anything was the unvarnished truth she had been denied for 3 years. Gloria listened without saying a word, her hands flat on the table, and when he was done, she asked him the only question that mattered to her, which was not how much or why or what now, but simply, did she suffer? And Sterling Drake, who could have lied to comfort her, told her the truth about that too. Gently, that the nurse beside her had said Camille was frightened at first, and then, near the end, calm, that she had not been alone, that a stranger had held her hand and told her she was doing great the whole way down. And Gloria Tatum put her face in her hands at her own kitchen table and wept, finally, the way she had not been able to weep in 3 years of fighting. Because she had spent those years so braced for battle that she had never once been allowed to simply be a mother whose daughter had died. And now, of all the people on this earth, it was the man who owned the airline who had finally set the truth down in front of her and let her grieve it. If you've made it this far with me, here at the part that matters most, then stay, because what these two built out of the wreckage is the thing that will outlive them both. It did not happen quickly, and it did not happen easily, and Gloria made him earn every inch of it, as she should have. But Sterling Drake had meant what he said, and he proved it the only way that counts, with actions and not words. He settled with Gloria, fully and publicly, with no gag, no non-disclosure, the company admitting exactly what it had done. The truth of Camille's death entered into the public record, where it could never be buried again, which was the one thing Gloria had wanted all along, and the one thing the machine had refused her. And the money, the real and substantial money, Gloria Tatum did with it. The thing that tells you everything about who she was, which was that she refused to keep it for herself. Because she did not want to be a woman who got rich off her daughter's death, she told Sterling Drake that she would take his settlement on one condition: that the bulk of it go to make sure this never happened to another family. And so together they built it. The Camille Tatum Foundation, dedicated to in-flight medical safety and to supporting families who had lost someone to corporate negligence and were being ground down by the machine the way Gloria had been. And they asked Gloria to lead it. And Gloria, who had been driving nights to outrun a silence, finally found something louder than the silence, which was purpose. The settlement, when it came, was not the thing the lawyers on either side had expected, because Gloria dictated its terms, and they were not the terms of someone trying to get rich. She required, first, the truth, in public, on the record, the sealed file unsealed, the arbitration abandoned, Meridian standing up in the daylight and saying plainly what it had done, and that it had been wrong, which the company's lawyers fought to the last because it exposed them to everything, and which Sterling Drake ordered them to do anyway. She required, second, that the bulk of the money never touch her own accounts, that it go instead into the foundation, because Gloria had seen what happens to people who profit from their own grief, and she would sooner have driven nights for the rest of her life. And she required, third, the thing that mattered most to her, more than money, more even than the apology, which was the rule. She had not wanted, in the end, to destroy Meridian Airways, though she could have tried. She had wanted to change it, to reach into the machine that killed Camille and rewire the exact circuit that had made her daughter's life worth less than an on-time arrival, so that the next mother's child would live. Sterling Drake gave her all three, and the foundation gave Gloria the one thing grief had stolen and money could never have bought back: a reason to get up in the morning, a place to put the enormous love that had nowhere to go since Camille, a way to make her daughter's kindness keep moving through the world long after the girl who carried it was gone. The Camille Tatum Foundation took her late husband's steady name out of Gloria's memory and her daughter's bright one, and made of the two of them something that would outlast them both. Within a couple of years, it had helped a dozen families fight the kind of fight Gloria had nearly lost alone, had put lawyers and grief counselors and simple human company beside people who had thought themselves invisible, and had become, quietly, a place where the worst day of your life did not have to be faced all by yourself. Gloria ran it out of a small, bright office with Camille's photograph on the wall behind her desk. And she went to work every morning now, instead of driving away from an empty house every night. And that, she would tell you, had saved her own life as surely as anything had ever saved anyone. And Sterling Drake did the harder thing, the thing inside his own company. He instituted, over the howling of his own executives, a new and absolute policy across every Meridian aircraft. A policy that came to be known throughout the airline, and eventually throughout the industry that grudgingly followed Meridian's lead, as Camille's rule. The rule was simple. When a passenger has a medical emergency and a qualified person on board says, "Divert," the aircraft diverts, full stop, no calculation, no penalty to the crew, ever. The cost be damned, because a human life is not a line item. And the moment an airline starts pretending it is, the airline has lost the only thing that ever justified its existence. Sterling Drake stood up in front of his entire company and told them the story of Camille Tatum. The whole story, the pediatric nurse who sang to frightened children and died because a landing was expensive. And he told them that the airline he founded 40 years ago to treat ordinary people like somebody had drifted into treating them like numbers. And that it stopped now, with them, in that room. Some say it was the only time anyone ever saw Sterling Drake cry in public. The on-time numbers slipped a little that year, and not one more passenger died waiting for a plane that would not land. The rule spread, the way a good idea spreads once someone powerful is finally brave enough to absorb the cost of it. Other carriers, shamed by the headlines and nudged by their own crews, quietly adopted versions of it, until diverting for a medical emergency stopped being a black mark a captain feared and became simply what you do. The obvious thing, the only humane thing, the thing it should always have been. Flight attendants wrote to the foundation to say that the rule had changed how it felt to do their jobs, that they no longer carried the silent dread of being the one in the chain who would pay for doing right. And once, about 2 years on, a Meridian captain diverted a flight to save a man having a heart attack over Nebraska, got him to a hospital with minutes to spare, and afterward, shaken, looked up Camille's story and wrote Gloria a letter she kept framed on her desk that said only, "I diverted because of your daughter. He is alive because of your daughter. Thank you for making them let me land." Gloria read that letter on the days the grief came back hard, which it still did, which it always would, and it did not fix anything. But it reminded her that some part of Camille was still out there, somewhere over Nebraska, still stopping for whoever was stranded, still refusing to ask their name first. 1 year later, on a clear, bright Colorado morning with the mountains sharp against the sky, Gloria Tatum stood up at the dedication of the foundation that bore her daughter's name, in front of a room full of families who had lost people the way she had lost Camille, and had thought, until they found the foundation, that they were grinding through it alone. And she told them about the blizzard. She told them about her mother's rule, the one she had lived her whole life by and very nearly cursed herself for on the night she learned the truth. That you stop for whoever's stranded and you don't ask their name first. And she said that for a long time after that night, she had wondered whether the rule was a fool's rule, whether kindness to strangers was just a way of getting hurt, whether she should have driven past the tired old man in the storm. And then she said that she had come to understand it differently, that her kindness to Sterling Drake, given in total ignorance, asking nothing, expecting nothing, was the very thing that had finally reached the one man, with the power to make Camille's death mean something, that had cracked open a conscience 3 layers of lawyers had sealed off, that had set in motion every good thing now standing in that room. I didn't ask his name, Gloria said. And if I had asked his name, I would have driven away, and I would have been right to. And Camille's death would still be a secret in a sealed file, and that rule that's saving lives in the sky right now would never have existed. So I'm going to keep my mama's rule. I'm going to keep stopping for whoever's stranded. Because you never know, she said. You never, ever know who the stranger in your storm is going to turn out to be, or what your kindness to them is going to set loose in the world. Sterling Drake was in the room that day, in the back, where he insisted on sitting now. And he did not speak, because it was not his day to speak. But he stayed afterward, and he and Gloria stood together for a while in front of the big photograph of Camille, the founder of an airline and the mother of the young woman his airline had failed. 2 people whom a blizzard and a kindness had bound together in the most unlikely grief knot imaginable. And they did not say much, because there was not much left to say that the foundation and the rule and the public truth had not already said. They had become, against all of it, something like friends, which was its own small, impossible mercy. The kind the world hands out so rarely that you have to write it down when it happens, so people will believe it can. People asked Gloria sometimes how she could stand to be in the same room as him, let alone build something beside him. And she never had a tidy answer, because there was not one. She did not excuse him. She did not pretend the airline had not killed her child, or that his not knowing made him innocent, because she believed, and told him to his face, that a man who builds a machine is responsible for what the machine does, whether he looks or not, and that his 3 years of not looking were their own kind of sin. But she had also driven him home through a blizzard before she knew any of it and had liked him, and that fact could not be unmade. And she had decided, somewhere in the long work of building the foundation, that she was not going to let what his company had taken from her also take her capacity to work with a flawed man toward a good end. That was its own kind of refusing to ask his name first. He had turned out to be the worst possible passenger in her storm, and she had chosen, with her eyes fully open now, to keep driving him somewhere better anyway, because that was who she was. And she was not going to let even this make her into somebody else. I want to tell you something, here at the end, the way I do. This story has a coincidence, and it's so large that in real life it would feel impossible. And I left it that big on purpose, because I wanted you to feel the size of the question it asks. which is this: would you have been kind to the stranger in the storm if you had known who he was? And the honest answer, for most of us, is no. And that is not a moral failing. That is justice. That is a mother's right. But the deeper thing the story is reaching for is not about that one impossible night. It is about all the ordinary nights, the 1,000 strangers in the 1,000 small storms of a life, the ones whose names we will never know and whose stories we will never hear, and the quiet, enormous truth that you cannot know, you can never know, what a kindness costs you or what it sets loose, and that the only way to live by the rule is to live by it blind, to stop for whoever's stranded precisely because you don't get to know first who they are. Gloria Tatum's kindness did not erase what was done to her child. Nothing could, but it reached, by a path no one could have planned, all the way into the locked heart of the machine that broke her, and it pried that heart open. And out of the opening came a rule that is keeping other people's children alive. That is what kindness given freely can do. Not always, not even often, but sometimes, when you least expect it, more than you could ever have asked. So let me leave you with a question tonight. Has a stranger ever been kind to you in a storm? The kind of kindness that asked nothing and that you never forgot? Or have you ever been the one who stopped? Tell me about it in the comments. Say their name if you know it. And if you don't, that's all right too. Because the best ones, sometimes, you never do. I read everyone, and it always means more than you know. And one real and gentle thing before I go, because this story holds a grief that some of you are carrying for real tonight. If you have lost a child, there is no fixing that, and I would never pretend there is. But you do not have to carry it with no one beside you. The Compassionate Friends is a national organization that exists solely to support families after the death of a child, with local chapters and people who understand because they have been where you are. And you can find them online or by phone. And you can also dial 211 from almost anywhere in the United States to be connected to grief support and other help near you. Reaching out is not a betrayal of the one you lost. It is one of the ways you carry them forward. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs the reminder that a small kindness can travel further than you will ever see. Subscribe for a new story every week. And the next time you pass a stranger stranded in a storm, remember Gloria Tatum, and remember that you never know who you are stopping for, or what your kindness might one day set loose in the world. Thank you for being here with me. I'll see you in the next one.